Welcome back to the deep dive. We are pulling up the blueprints today on a military operation that's, well, absolutely essential to understanding modern African history, but it's often forgotten.
Yeah, completely overlooked sometimes.
We're talking about Black Africa's first modern, really complex amphibious assault. And look, this wasn't some minor skirmish.
No, not at all. This was a high-risk naval strategy executed by a very, very young military force, and it fundamentally shaped the Nigerian Civil War.
So our mission today, as always, is to get into the details.
Exactly. We want to break down the Bonny Landing of July 1967. We'll try to extract the technical genius, the strategic thinking, and crucially, the secrecy needed to pull this thing off.
Especially considering the resources, or lack thereof.
Right. And the sheer inexperience of the Nigerian Navy back then, honestly, on paper, it maybe should have been a disaster.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We need some context first, just briefly. The Nigerian Civil War, 1967 to 1970. It really grew out of some deep-seated instability.
Yeah, I mean, Nigeria itself was an imperial creation, right? The 1914 amalgamation brought together over 200 ethnic groups.
You had major regional and religious divides. The north, largely Hausa and Fulani. The south, home to groups like the Yoruba and, critically for this story, the Igbo. That tension was always there, simmering.
And it didn't take long after independence in 1960 for things to boil over. You had disputed elections, a really contentious census of '63.
Then the coups in 1966. First, the January coup, mostly Igbo-led.
Followed by a devastating counter-coup in July '66. And that came with horrific pogroms targeting Igbos, especially in the north. Just terrible violence.
And that just shattered any remaining trust between the federal military government in Lagos under Yakubu Gowon and the eastern region's military governor, Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu.
Peace talks failed.
Yeah.
And so the eastern region seceded, declared itself the Republic of Biafra on May 30th, 1967.
And the war was on. And suddenly, controlling the coast, the rivers, that became maybe the single most critical strategic factor.
Absolutely. And if you're talking about controlling the coast, you have to talk about the architect of the federal naval strategy, Commander James Raw.
Raw's story is pretty amazing, but let's focus on what matters for this operation. His background.
Right. He wasn't just, a desk-bound officer. He was a D-Day veteran.
Wow.
Yeah. As a teenager, a midshipman, he actually navigated a landing craft, delivering U.S. infantry right onto Utah Beach in 1944.
So he'd seen amphibious landings up close under the worst possible conditions.
Exactly. And crucially, he was also trained as a commando in combined operations. So he understood the nitty-gritty, the immense difficulty of landing troops and gear under enemy fire. That's precisely what the Nigerian Navy was about to try.
And post-war, he became a hydrographer, mapping water.
Yes, which sounds maybe a bit dry, but it was absolutely vital. Think about it. He was the first person, Nigerian or British, to sign up for what became the Nigerian Naval Force, the NNS, back in the mid-50s.
So he literally helped build it from the ground up.
He built the foundations. While others recruited, he was charting the coast, figuring out the tides, the depths, making sure ships could even operate safely. When the war started, that knowledge was, well, priceless.
And he rose to become principal staff officer. There's this incredible detail in the sources about his commitment, right?
Oh, yeah. When the crisis broke, the British authorities ordered their personnel out. Evacuate immediately.
Standard procedure, you'd think.
But Raw refused. He stayed, even after the war officially began.
Why?
His reasoning, according to the sources, was that leaving would be a massive blow to the federal government's stability, undermine its authority right when it was most fragile. Gowon himself asked him to stay.
So he felt a personal duty.
He did. He invoked his oath to the crown, but also his commitment to Nigeria, the navy he helped create. That level of dedication meant the federal side had this experienced amphibious planner right there when they needed him most.
And they really needed him, because the big federal strategy was encirclement.
That's right. The Army was pushing on the land borders, trying to box Biafra in. The Navy's job: create a southern sector, punch through from the sea with amphibious landings.
But first things first, the blockade.
Yes. They had to start by blockading the Bonny River. Stop Biafra exporting oil, stop them getting supplies in. Once that was working reasonably well,
then they could think about landing troops somewhere.
Exactly. Rear Admiral Way told Raw, okay, figure out where we can land, assess the options. And Raw's analysis was purely about naval logistics. Minimize the risk to their very small, very new fleet.
Let's look at the options he rejected, because that tells us a lot. First up, Port Harcourt. The big prize, the oil center.
Right, but Ross shot that down immediately. He called it an invitation to disaster.
Why so definite?
It's 40 miles upriver. That's a 6-hour trip minimum.
Yeah.
And the last 20 miles, the river narrows right down. Perfect ambush territory. Mortars, rockets from the banks. They could lose ships easily. Too dangerous.
Okay, so Port Harcourt is out. What about Opobo?
Rejected, too. Main problems there were uncertain water depth and a river bar. You know those shifting sandbanks at river mouths? Lethal for navigation if you don't know exactly where they are.
Plus, not enough intel on buoys and beacons.
Precisely. For a navy that really couldn't afford to lose a single ship, especially a landing craft, that uncertainty was just unacceptable. Too much guesswork.
Which left Bonny Island.
Which left Bonny. And why Bonny? Because Raw, the hydrographer, knew it. He charted it. It had deep enough water for his ships, existing jetties.
And strategically.
As an island, once you took it, it was much easier to defend against a counterattack from the mainland, a secure foothold.
So Ross saw Bonny not just as a landing spot, but as a launch pad.
Absolutely. He laid out 3 clear advantages.
Good.
1, taking Bonny releases the ships tied up doing blockade duty. They could do other things.
Frees up assets, okay?
2, it gives the Army a forward base right near the coast to operate from and be supplied by sea. And 3, it's a safe place to build up more troops and supplies for that eventual, much harder push towards Port Harcourt later on.
Smart. A stepping stone. So the plan itself, Naval Operation Number 1, 1967. Pretty straightforward name.
Yes. Straightforward name for a complex operation. It was designed as a conventional amphibious assault. The target, the Biafran garrison on Bonny, estimated around 300 men.
The challenge was coordinating the fleet. These small ships like NNS Penelope, Ogoja, Nigeria, they'd only recently been armed up.
And Raw decided to command from the front. He was aboard NNS Penelope, his old survey ship, now armed, acting as the forward control officer, right in the thick of it.
And the positioning of the key ships was critical.
Oh, absolutely. Take the NNS Lokoja. That was the main landing craft tank, carrying the first assault wave. Raw didn't send it to the nearest beach.
Where did it go?
He directed it to the northern side of Bonnytown. Brilliant tactical move. Most of the Biafran troops were thought to be stationed further south. By landing north, the idea was to cut off their line of retreat, trap them between the landing force and the sea.
Clever. And the heavy firepower.
That came from NNS Nigeria. It had the biggest guns, twin 4-inchers. But Raw kept it safely out in the Atlantic in designated patrol areas called Osca and Papa, well, clear of the restricted river waters, just pounding targets from long range.
Okay, you've got troops landing, ships firing. How did they coordinate all this? You mentioned earlier the lack of joint training, the political issues that actively discouraged Army-Navy cooperation before the war.
Right. And communications gear was probably basic. So how do you make sure the Navy isn't firing on its own troops once they're ashore?
Yeah, that seems like a huge risk.
It was. And this, for me, is one of the most fascinating technical details from the sources. They used pyrotechnics, flares.
Like signal flares.
Exactly. Simple, visual, color-coded signals for real-time battlefield coordination between the Army and Navy.
How did it work?
Okay, so when the NNS Lokoja hit the beach with that first wave, their instruction was fire 1 red cart, very light.
Red flare goes up. What does that tell everyone?
It tells the ships offshore. Landing successful. Troops are ashore. Ground combat initiating. Basically the go signal for the next phase.
Okay. But then how do you manage the naval gunfire support? How do they know where the friendly troops are moving?
That's the really clever bit. Once the Army troops, the 3rd Marine Commando guys under Colonel Adekunle, had pushed inland a bit and secured their initial area, they had to fire 1 green very light.
Green flare, meaning?
Meaning, this is our southernmost position right now. That green flare became the visual dividing line for the ships like NNS Nigeria out in the Atlantic. Fire north of the green flare, that's enemy territory. South of the green flare, that's friendly.
Wow, using flares to create a dynamic no-fire line on the fly.
Incredibly audacious, right? Especially given, as you said, the challenges this very young Navy was facing.
Let's talk about those challenges. Beyond just not having trained together much?
Well, the resource issue was massive. Remember, a lot of experienced officers, particularly technicians of Eastern origin, had defected to Biafra.
And they didn't just leave, did they?
No. The sources are clear. There was sabotage, equipment damaged on ships, onshore facilities messed with. So the Federal Navy had to first fix its own house, deal with internal subversion before it could even think about launching an offensive operation like this. They were starting from behind.
And then there were the natural elements. Ra, the hydrographer, had to get the timing perfect, right? The tides.
Oh, absolutely critical. You're landing heavy LCTs, landing craft tanks. You need the tide to be right to get them high up the beach. Get it wrong, they get stuck.
So the date, July 25th, 1967, chosen specifically.
Very specifically. It offered a moonless night beforehand for a stealthy approach. High tide was predicted for dawn, perfect for beaching, and the sea was expected to be relatively calm.
But there was a risk there, too.
Yeah, Colonel Adekomo pointed this out later. That peak high tide window, it only lasted about 56 minutes, less than an hour. Meaning, if Biafra had been alert, had good intelligence, they could potentially have predicted the exact time window for the invasion based purely on the tide tables.
Yeah.
A huge vulnerability.
Which brings us to the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
The Federal Navy is taking this huge gamble, using risky signals, recovering from sabotage.
Yeah.
But what was Biafra doing?
Astonishingly little, it seems. Based on the sources, they were complacent. Dangerously so.
But they could have made it incredibly difficult.
Oh, absolutely disastrous. They could have easily laid sea mines in the river approaches, simple contact mines. They could have floated oil drums filled with explosives downriver. They could have just moved the navigation buoys around to confuse the federal ships and run them aground on sandbars.
Basic coastal defense stuff, really.
Basic, yes. And cheap. They didn't do any of it. Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu had made these, belligerent statements about sinking any approaching ship.
All talk, no action.
Apparently. No mines on the beaches, no proper coastal gun batteries set up, not even adequate watchtowers along the river approach, it seems. It's quite stunning, really.
Why? Why were they so unprepared on the coast?
It really suggests they underestimated the federal ability, or maybe the will, to launch a complex amphibious attack so early. Perhaps they thought the main threat was overland. Whatever the reason, it was a critical failure.
And that failure, combined with the federal state's secrecy, was key to the landing's success.
Totally. The feds went to extreme lengths to keep this under wraps.
Tell us about that.
Well, for weeks beforehand, they had joint Army-Navy practice runs down at Tarkwa Bay near Lagos, practicing getting off the ships, coordinating fire, the whole 9 yards, all done in total secrecy.
How'd they manage that?
The main naval base at Apapa was sealed off, out of bounds. They censored mail coming in and out, tapped phones, apparently even did random roll calls to try and catch potential spies or leakers. Maximum operational security. They knew surprise was everything.
And it worked. All that planning, the secrecy, it paid off. The actual landing was incredibly fast.
Breathtakingly swift, yes. Bonnytown was essentially secured within about 2 hours of the first troops hitting the beach.
What were Ra's first moves?
His absolute first priority, his first radio order once Penelope entered the river was destroy the Bonny signal station. Cut their communications with Port Harcourt immediately. Isolate the garrison.
Smart. Was there any real resistance?
The main naval resistance came from a single ship, the NNS Ibadan. It was actually a former federal minesweeper that Biafra had captured or commandeered.
How did that fight go?
Short and sharp. The federal ship NNS Agoja engaged it, scored a direct hit pretty quickly. The Ibadan caught fire and was effectively neutralized.
Were there any hitches on the federal side?
Minor ones. The Lokoja did apparently run aground briefly while landing a later wave of troops, but the Biafran defense was so disorganized by then they couldn't capitalize on it.
So let's step back. What's the big picture here? The historical significance.
It's huge, really. The Bonny Landing was a genuine milestone for modern Black African militaries. You have to remember, up to this point, these kinds of large-scale, combined arms amphibious operations in Africa, they were run by Europeans. Think Operation Torch in North Africa, Operation Ironclad in Madagascar during World War II.
This was different.
Completely. This was an African military planning and executing a complex, modern military operation, largely on its own terms, yes, with some key British expertise like Raw still involved, but fundamentally an indigenous effort facing its own unique internal challenges.
And the impact was immediate.
Oh, yeah. Twofold, really. First, militarily and psychologically. It was a massive morale boost for the federal side. Proved they could do it, and it secured that absolutely vital foothold for the whole encirclement strategy.
It showed they were capable.
Exactly. And second, the economic impact. This was critical. By taking Bonny, the main oil export terminal,
Follow the money.
Always. It sent a crystal clear message to the international oil companies, especially Shell, who controlled something like 80% of Nigerian oil production at the time.
What was the message?
The message was, the federal military government in Lagos is in charge here. They control the oil infrastructure now. If you want to do business, you deal with Lagos, not Biafra.
So it cut off Biafra's main source of potential foreign currency and legitimacy.
Precisely. Starved them economically right from the start. It's a powerful example of how naval power can directly translate into economic leverage in a civil conflict.
It really is a fascinating case study. Preparation, secrecy, exploiting the enemy's weakness.
And Raw's strategic foresight, definitely, coupled with the sheer determination of those federal troops and sailors.
But connecting back, as you said, the sources also highlight this, well, terrifying vulnerability.
They really do. The landing succeeded partly because the federal planning and execution were good, yes, but also significantly because the Biafran coastal defense was just shockingly inadequate.
It could have gone so differently.
So differently. If Biafra had just implemented basic defenses, a few sea mines, even just shifting those navigation buoys around in the river channel could have potentially run the Lokoja or even Ra's command ship aground, caused chaos, maybe even stopped the landing entirely.
Which really changes how you view the whole thing.
It does, and it leaves us with a really provocative question, I think, for you, the listener, to ponder. How do you weigh the efficiency and secrecy of a new, motivated military force like the Federal Navy here against the complacency, maybe the overconfidence, of an established but internally fractured defense like Biafra's seems to have been in this instance?
And thinking even bigger, what lessons can we draw from this very first modern amphibious assault by a Black African state about the enduring power of naval strategy, especially in internal conflicts? Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for joining us for